Mother, man.
G'day guys, this is Mick.
And this is Tex.
And you're listening to the sexy Murder Metal Mayhem.
Spreading faster than a case of the clap in a trailer court. Able to shatter eardrums within a 666-mile radius. A podcast more brutal than all the rest. It's Murder Metal Mayhem! This is Pete Altieri with the Murder Metal Mayhem podcast, and I'm joined by Tex for this interview, and we're going to be talking to Mick, our Australian friend, listener, and 666 Club member. Mick is an alias to protect his real identity. Coincidentally, Tex is also an alias to protect his identity due to his current occupation. Mick is a former federal Australian police officer, and Tex is a corrections officer. We love having Mick on when we're doing an Australian case. So, Mick, how is it going over there across the globe in Australia?
Yeah, mate, things are going well. You know, it's nice to be here. It's nice to obviously meet Tex for the first time as well. But
yeah,
it's sitting at around 23 Celsius. I think that's 73 for you guys.
Okay, that's pretty nice.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
But it's blowing a gale, mate. We're sitting at about 25 to 30 mile an hour winds outside.
Oh shit. Okay. Well, yeah, it's here. It's about 80 degrees Fahrenheit today. Tex, what about you down there in the great state of Texas?
Oh, well, there's no wind here, of course. And it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
God
so,
damn. Fuck.
Yeah,
that's
somewhere
brutal.
between 100 and 103, something like that.
Wow. Yeah. That's pretty brutal.
So the air conditioner's turned on.
Oh, yes, sir. 24/7.
Yeah. Mine's on too. I don't fool around with that. That's one thing I grew up. My mom used to leave the AC ripping because her and my dad grew up in the Bronx with no air conditioning. So when we finally got air conditioning, they were like, this never gets shut off. You see this here? Don't ever shut it off. And my house was so cold when you came home and touched the doorknob, it was cold.
Wow.
That's
Awesome.
when you knew it was like hanging meat in there. So yeah, that's how I grew up, and I'm no fool. I don't care what it costs. I'm just not going to mess with it. So yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Tex, why don't you take that first question there?
All right. Well, Mick, it is really freaking awesome to finally meet you, man. As you know, next week's episode is going to be on Chow Hayes. And I know he's a big time name in the Australian crime scene, I guess. When you hear that name, what are some of the first things that come to mind? And is that name familiar with true crime fans over there?
Yeah, mate, absolutely. You know, so some of the first things, would be, obviously he's known as Australia's first gangster. So when people talk about gangsters, inevitably they throw back to Chow. But mate, he was just ruthless, and he was, fearless, and staunch, even until his last days. He remained, completely irrepentant to any sin that he ever or crime that he ever did. He's a guy that lived that lifestyle, and even as an old man when he passed away, there's some stories, about him wanting to crawl out of his deathbed.
Yeah,
and go and shoot someone who he thought that had wronged him. So he was just unbelievably staunch. And from a true crime perspective, anyone who's in true crime, in Australia, is aware of who Chow is. He's a huge figure in Australian crime, especially in that Sidney sort of area. And especially his relationship with Kate Leigh, in the Razor Wars. He came up during that era, and you can't really speak of true crime, but especially true crime in Sydney, without going to him as almost like the godfather of it.
Yeah, that's true. I love that artist, Bill Leak, and he described Chow as reptilian when he painted that picture of him, and he did have a really creepy look to him. Even as an older guy, he was scary. So,
oh yeah,
that's for sure. Now, what was Sidney like, Mick, in this time when he grew up? He was born in 1911, but he was born to a pretty rough home situation. How much of a factor do you think that played in how he ended up turning out?
Oh, look, it's hard to say. You've got that aspect of nature versus nurture, obviously. And if he was in a better environment, would he have turned out to be a better person? I don't think that would have been the case. Sydney at the time, like the rest of the world, in the early 1900s was an incredibly rough place. It was very poor. It wasn't very affluent. People would struggle. It had only been 10 years or so since we actually became a nation. So we were, in that fledgling sort of era. As you said, he was born just before World War One. His father, worked away as what we would call a ringbarker. So that's somebody who works in the forestry industry.
Okay. So
they would take the bark, off trees, and that would let the tree die, and then they would harvest the trees. So
okay.
all of the men in his life, at some point, especially when World War One kicked off, had left, and effectively was due to fend for himself. So without those male role models, without that ability to, I suppose, temper that temperament that he had. He had to end up fending for himself, and if there's no male figures as it is now, or no male role models, you join whatever, male models you can, and they're normally, like-minded gangs.
Right. Yeah, it was definitely rough. I think they said that the projects there had been torn down like 6 different times because they had just gotten so run down, and they tear them down and build them again, and they'd run them down again, and it was just a mess.
Absolutely, because there was no money for anything because everything was put into the war effort.
Right.
And it would be similar, probably in the States as well during that sort of era.
Right.
Especially with, we lost, something like 60,000 men died during World War One. And the best part of 120,000 came back either, wounded or injured.
Right.
And those traditional male role models were not there, so he had to grow up with his aunt and his grandmother. His mother, some reports say that his mother was a prostitute, so he had that instability there as well.
Right.
So what you do is you just start running with kids around your own age or a little bit older, and look after yourself.
Right.
Yeah. What sort of crimes did he start out with? And what age did he start out? And one question I had right off the top too is, how in the heck did he earn the nickname of Chow?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you look at the early photos of him, and he looks like he's got some Asian descent.
He does,
especially the black and white ones. So
right.
When he was young, around 7 or 8, he was in a fight with some local guys, local boys, and basically one of them called him a dirty chow. Because he looked like he was Asian. It was obviously a derogatory word for people who were Asian at the time, and
right.
And as any good, nickname goes, you normally nicknames are a result of, having the piss taken out of you or being teased. So, his name stuck, and he became known as Chow.
I'm surprised he embraced it, but I mean, sometimes it's like, it's just what people are calling you. I guess you got to deal with it, right?
Absolutely. And maybe, it set him aside from, the other guys. There's probably no one else who had something like that. So if the name Chow was mentioned, then at least everyone would understand who it is, as opposed to, well, it's John or it's Fred.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
So he started, obviously early. Truancy, back in those days was a crime. You had to go to school.
Right.
But obviously aside from that, it was just that sort of like started in the small side of crime. So, petty stealing, theft, extortion, and then started to build up into assault, robbing people, shoplifting.
Right.
So that normal sort of introductory sort of level of crime before he made his name and, branched out.
Yeah, and we were talking a minute ago, Mick, about the Razor Wars, and we covered that extensively when we did our Tillie Devine episode here in May. And I know that he aligned himself with Kate Leigh, as you mentioned, against Tillie. Can you tell us a little bit about what that relationship was with Chow and Kate Leigh? And for our listeners that maybe didn't hear that episode or aren't familiar, just briefly, what were we talking about? We're talking about the Razor Wars.
Yeah, well, the Razor Wars was a period, in the 20s, late 20s and 30s in Australia, in Sydney, in and around the central heart of Sydney, which is a couple of places, Surrey Hills, King's Cross, and everyone's favourite Woolloomooloo.
Yeah, I love that one.
Darlinghurst, where effectively you had two female crime figures. So Kate Leigh was a little bit older. She was established there for some time, and they were running things like prostitution and illegal gambling, SP bookmaking, so like racehorses, cocaine. And what we would call the sly grog, or the bootlegged alcohol. And then Tillie's come over from England, and then obviously has started to make a mark in a similar sort of area, having been in prostitution in the UK previously. So effectively, the Razor Wars were gang turf wars between these two female crime bosses and their gangs to seek. I suppose that control over the centre of Sydney at the time. Okay. And that's where all the the working class, that's where all the ships came in. That's where if any later on when the US came over, the soldiers came over in World War II, that's where they disembarked the ships, so they had control of those brothels and the right. liquor outlets, etc. So that's effectively the Razor Wars. It was an interesting time. New South Wales government said you can no longer carry a firearm. So obviously, pistols and firearms were outlawed. So they had to turn to the next best thing, that was concealable and quite brutal. So right. they started to carry what we call cutthroat razors.
I love that name. I love the name cutthroat razor so much better. Yeah. And I also thought that was interesting how the fact that they outlawed guns, and you said the last time we talked about this, the fine was like the amount of money the average person made in a year. So obviously that's going to discourage just about everybody from fooling with it, except the criminals. Yeah. Like Chow loved his firearms, but the fact that they couldn't carry guns, so they go to the next best thing. That cutthroat razor, that straight razor, that's brutal stuff, man.
Oh, absolutely, and it was almost like a badge of honor with some of them, that they'd have.
Sure, a scar across your face.
Scar across the face, and,
right.
So, but he aligned with Kate Leigh, principally against Tillie. So he was, a bit of a standover man and, extortionist. He was a heavy, especially in relation to like the illegal gambling sort of places that they'd set up. So he was involved in, a number of fights. There's a famous one in King's Cross, which at the point was a red light district. It's a suburb that's famous for all its brothels. And, there was a fight there where, 50 gangsters were, cutting each other up.
Yeah.
And that's quite a famous, I suppose, incident at that time. But it's interesting that, later on when his ego grew so much, his hubris got out of control that he actually even turned against Kate and, ended up shooting her de facto partner outside their house one day.
Oh, wow.
Because he's, trying to stand over everyone. He's making a name for himself. People are fearful. So he's thinking, well, potentially maybe I can get some of her action.
Wow.
and there was some sort of inter, and he's ended up shooting her boyfriend.
Yeah, pretty brutal stuff.
He was out of control.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And yeah, the Razor War is just definitely a good one. If you're listening to this and you want to know more about that, check out that Tillie Devine episode we did, which actually got quite a few listens.
Yeah, that was a good one, man. I love that one.
Yeah.
Now, Chow got lucky and was found not guilty for the 1945 murder of Eddie Wyman, who was a fellow gangster. His luck would run out, and he went down for the murder of Bobby Leigh in 1951. Mick, what sort of time did he get, and what were prisons like in Australia at this time?
Mate, he ended up getting 15, or around about 15 to 20 years. Well, he got 20, but he served 15, I believe, for the murder of Bobby Leigh. And he ended up being in, some of the prisons in Sydney, which at the time were very old, still colonial style prisons.
Right.
You've probably seen them in your day as well. They certainly weren't modern. There was no luxuries involved. They looked like an old castle, effectively.
Right.
They're brutal. There's a bucket in the corner as opposed to a toilet. There was, chain gangs. You had to break rocks in the yard. So it was really, really brutal.
Right.
But it's interesting with the Wyman matter that he was a colleague of Chow's in the past. They had a bit of a racket going where they would sell false cigarettes to the American servicemen, who had come over for World War II. And they called it the cabbage leaf racket. So they would take all the tobacco out and just put in dry cabbage leaves. And they would make, I think the last report was something like about £10,000 a week. So in today's money, it's about $500,000 a week.
Wow.
And Wyman was, skimming some money off the top. And there'd been a couple of sort of incidents in the past, So he ended up, finding Wyman, sneaking into his house effectively and shooting him. But at the time, he had a bit of an alibi. But with the Bobby Leigh matter, he was also, a local gangster.
Right.
It's interesting with Chow is that he referred to people as, as straights or squares. So people who weren't involved in the criminal underworld, and then pretty much everybody else. And everything was fair game if you were in the criminal underworld. You would never have any offence or any crimes against women or children. But if you were a criminal, if you were a gangster, or if you were a crook, then everything goes.
Right.
So there were some issues in relation to Bobby Leigh. There'd been Chow had beaten him up. He'd bashed him, quite severely previously, and as a bit of a retribution, Leigh had wanted to get back at him. And he'd heard that on a particular night, Chow likes to sit at home and listen to the radio. So Leigh's turned up at the house. Unbeknownst to him, Chow wasn't home. Mm-hmm. So he's ended up firing some shots through the window and killed Chow's nephew. And obviously he became absolutely enraged, with that. And over the next, few weeks, he's made every attempt to find him and ended up tracking him down at, a local nightclub, in front of, 70 or 80, witnesses. He's shot him.
Yeah.
But
and not one of them would testify against him. 70 or 80 people, they're all like, I didn't see shit.
They've all got amnesia. Yep, the amnesia set in.
That's brutal. And he didn't just shoot him once. He emptied it. He shot him once and then stood over him and emptied that gun and then just left. That's just brutal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shows the level of fear, that people had. Was that if he's so brazen to walk into a crowded, nightclub or pub and just, shoot someone there and then you're not going to be the person who puts your hand up and says, I'll provide you a statement, fellas.
Yeah, I don't think you would have lasted too long doing that.
No, mate, you're stepping and dragging, and I didn't see a thing.
Right.
But it took three trials to finally convince him or convict him.
Yeah, that was kind of crazy that it took 3 trials.
Well, they couldn't get any witnesses.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
and it's that old adage. It's that old adage that if no one talks, everyone walks.
that's true. That's true. That's true. I didn't realize the prisons were that brutal, though, at that time. So that definitely, at least the time he did, wasn't pleasant. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, mate, not at all. So, we've got a few prisons, and especially some older ones, in Sydney, because Sydney was, from a historical perspective, obviously where the first fleet landed, and that was, the start of the Australian settlement.
Right.
And I think most people realise that we started as a penal colony. So
Right.
every major city, every major port at the time, had a prison. Like Tasmania, for example, our most southern state, was a prison island. That's Port Arthur. That's where
Right.
the massacre was.
Yeah.
So that was basically a prison island. So very old, and like a lot, it's changed a bit now, but back in those days, even the boys' homes and the reformatories you got sent to, they were just absolutely brutal.
Yeah. Now, with guys like Chow, I mean, they do a long time in prison like he did, and they come out to a very different world. So what was that like, Mick, for him coming out of prison and, 15 years later, lots changed,
Yeah, mate, absolutely. And I think he ended up spending more than half his life, in and out of prisons.
Right.
And every time that he went in, especially in relation to the Bobby Leigh, he's come out, and he's wanted to go straight back into the same occupation. He knows nothing else.
Right.
He doesn't have any vocation skills. He didn't finish school.
Not going to
so
go
he doesn't
sell
have-
insurance or go
No, mate, he's not selling insurance.
bus
it's
driver.
No, mate, he's not doing door-to-door vacuum cleaning selling, I can tell you. He's coming out and he's going straight back into the same, business that he used to. Albeit, a little bit different because obviously the times have changed, but still very much that go back out, find whoever is, the biggest dog, in the yard at that time.
Right.
Stand over them, assault them or stab them, and all of a sudden, it's back into the same racket.
Right.
Yeah. Now,
even
Mick,
even in his old days, as I said, even when he's come out the last time in about 1977, he's still wanting to have that influence. He's still wanting to, get in with some of the, the gangsters there and live on that past reputation to, start doing the standover.
Right.
But he's an old man, and everyone's just basically, turning their nose up at him.
Yeah, because it was like the mid 60s, I think, that he got out. So,
Yeah, he
A lot
went
had
back in again.
changed.
He went back in 1970 for assault. He's assaulted and stabbed someone with a glass. So he's basically glassed them.
Yeah, I saw that term glassed them, and I
Yeah.
thought that's pretty brutal. Yeah.
Yeah, so smash a glass in a pub and
Yeah.
start stabbing someone with it.
oh yeah, that's the way to do it right there. Now,
So what do you? What do you guys call that? Do you have that over there? Is that what happens?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the bottle breaking, you see that in movies, they break the bottle,
Yeah.
same type of thing. But I never heard that term glassed used before. I thought it was kind of, I love the Australian slang. It just, it's interesting. I like looking them up to figure out, like standover man. I'm like, what is that? It's an extortionist.
what is that?
It's extortion.
Extortionist?
Yeah.
Okay.
Extortionist. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's all
Yeah,
this
so-
sly grog. I mean, we talked about that in the Tillie Devine. You mentioned that here earlier, but I love that kind of stuff. So yeah, glassed him. I thought that was cool. But yeah, brutal as hell. Cut that guy in the face and arms, and yeah, got like another 7 years after he
7
just
years.
got out.
Yeah.
Yep, and because it's that and Tex would probably be able to provide better input. Are prisons actually set there to rehabilitate people, or do a lot of people just go in and then come out and they're just straight back into that same lifestyle because they effectively don't know any different?
Yeah, what's that? I know we've talked about this so many times, Tex, but on that subject, I mean, what do you see down there in Texas with that whole recidivism issue?
Man, we've got a whole lot of programs now to rehabilitate folks, and like in the last year or so, seen a lot of murders, seen a lot of assaults and stuff like that. Most of it's due to the staffing level that we have, and the type of inmates that we're getting in now. But I mean, we're set up to rehabilitate. It's just that the inmates take that and run with it, or are they gonna to go with what they already know, which is a criminal lifestyle?
Right.
It's how you survive in prison. So
True.
yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And if someone like Hayes came into one of the prisons where you were working, do you think, with all your experience, that he's someone who could change his ways, or you would just go, nah, this guy's going to serve his time, keep his head down, do what he has to, and get out and go straight back to it?
I think Chow would probably be running the prison. Yeah.
Yeah, like definitely. The whole shot caller type thing kind of taking over.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with today's technology with cell phones and the tablets that we're giving them now, which are supposedly locked out of any type of internet access, but I think that they're getting internet access with them.
Oh, shit.
There's a lot of stuff going on outside that, hits, stuff like that when snitches get out.
Right.
There's hits going on.
Interesting.
So somebody's calling those shots.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because that's interesting here that, in Australia, like, the prisoners don't get tablets, they don't get phones, they get access to a prison email that they can, email, friends and family, but they're certainly not getting access to any electronic devices at all. From the state, obviously they get smuggled in somehow.
Right.
But they're certainly not provided anything, for it.
A big problem we're having right now is drugs getting in through actual paper mail. They're dousing like liquid K2 and liquid methamphetamine onto a piece of mail, and it comes in, and then they divvy it up and sell it, and that's a prison economy nowadays.
Wow.
So part of the solution for that was scanning the mail in onto the tablets, and that's how they're getting their mail.
Okay. Well, so it's like the old, paintings and photographs that were laced with LSD, and you'd cut them up and.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
That's crazy.
That's really. Yeah. Don't tell the Australian crooks, mate, because that's the next thing. That's the next thing that we're going to start to see.
It'll keep you busy for a while, Mick.
Oh, mate, no. I did a obviously off the topic, but I did an investigation into one of the local prisons, in the Canberra, New South Wales sort of area. And that a lot of that was to do with contraband coming in. We would have drone drops. So, drones would be flying, 200 feet up in the air and dropping tennis balls full of things. And,
that's right. Yeah.
It was just like, if only they had, used that skill for good, not evil, mate. These guys would be just unbelievable.
I know. We talk about that all the time on the show. It's like, if these guys use their good to run a fucking business or something, yeah, like that Texas 7 case, Tex, we were talking about that with that guy that masterminded that. I mean, Jesus, like, what the hell, man?
Yeah. Now, Mick, you were talking about Port Arthur earlier. Do you think there's any prisons that we could, like Australian prisons or asylums, that you think would be good for us to cover on the podcast?
Yeah, like as I said, obviously we've done Port Arthur in the past, but being a penal colony, to start with, Tasmania, for example, was where the worst of the worst got sent. So if the mainland couldn't deal with them, they were basically banished to to Van Diemen's Land, as it was called at the time. But Tasmania,
that might be cool to do that island. Tasmania, Texas,
that would be awesome.
The way it started and stuff. That I think that'd be interesting.
Because that was effectively an entire island that was established as a penal colony, and we've had a few off the coast of Australia that have effectively been the same. So some of the closer offshore islands were established as basically prisons for the worst on the mainland. They couldn't be dealt with, so they were just, sent,
Right.
a couple of hours out to sea, onto an island.
Wow.
Right.
But we got there's a famous, well, it's closed now. There's a famous prison in Melbourne called Pentridge.
I've heard of that one before.
Pentridge is one of those sort of like old, big colonial style prisons set up in about the 1850s. And that was the prison where all of the worst criminals in Melbourne went, and they had a famous sort of section in that called H Division or Hell Division. So if you were the worst criminal within the worst prison, you got sent to H Division. And that's where the likes of Mick will know the name, like Chopper Reed and, those sort of guys. Those sort of guys all got sent to Pentridge, which was just an absolute brutal. It was, being bashed by the guards. It was all sorts of things. And within that, the worst place to be was H Division or Hell Division.
Wow.
And like, for example, with the Chopper story, he's famous for cutting his ears off, whilst he was in prison. And the reason that he had someone cut his ears off is because he didn't want to stay in H Division.
Oh,
so
wow.
they effectively, he got sent out and got sent to, like the medical ward because H Division was just too bad.
Bad enough for Chopper Reed to want to do that? Holy shit. Because that dude was a badass, chopping people's fingers off. And
oh, yeah,
holy shit.
The old toe cutter gang, yep.
Yeah.
But we have another one not far from Canberra. So it's an old prison. It's now called the Goulburn Supermax. So it used to be the Goulburn prison, but it got established now as effectively, the largest, one of the largest prisons in the country. And that's where, if you're a terrorist, you get set. If you're, someone who repeatedly escapes, that's where you get sent. If the crimes are massive, as far as the sentencing, you'll go to the Goulburn Supermax.
Interesting.
Like Florence.
Yeah, we did an episode on that, the ADX there in Florence. That's some brutal stuff there.
But we've also got, like some of and you've probably got the same thing, like the young, boys' homes and the young reformatories that the young lads got sent to at the time.
Yeah.
There's one just north of Sydney called Gosford. It's about an hour and a half north of Sydney. It used to be called the Gosford Boys' Home. But it's changed its names a few times, and that's where the likes of, Chow Hayes got sent. And, Pete, you mentioned, previously Chris Flannery and a few others, they've all been sent to this equivalent of what was the Goulburn Boys' Homes.
Okay.
It got closed and reopened and closed and reopened under different names a few times, because of, that sort of, the brutality of how the boys were treated, at the time, run by Franciscan monks or, those types of things.
Sure.
Right.
And, the worst thing to do was send, delinquent boys to somewhere where there's a whole bunch of other delinquent boys.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about that with Manson. I mean, there's been a bunch of them, they learn real quick how to stay alive inside, and that's
absolutely
just get worse instead of better. That's for sure. So that's why it's nice to hear what Tex was saying about, I mean, I know these guys are pretty rough around the edges and not all of them are going to make it, but obviously better to try to give them some sort of skill and some way to adapt outside, because we got to deal with them on the outside, so, we all got to live in this society. So, I mean, it's a tough battle, but it's good to hear that at least, that it's being tried, Yeah,
and, we got to bear in mind, this is, him starting to go to prison, was the 1920s, all the way through to 1970. So, a lot of the prison reforms wouldn't have taken place.
Right.
It would just be, you're there as a punishment, we make it as uncomfortable, as we possibly can, and potentially that's going to change your ways because you're living in, an absolute shit environment.
Right.
But as you mentioned, Pete, they come from shit environments to start with.
Right.
That's right.
So this is really nothing new for them.
No, that's true. Now, Mick, it is amazing when you look at our stats. 77% of our listeners are in the U.S., followed by 13% in Australia, and then all the rest of the countries on the list are either 1% or below. So we've got a lot of Australian listeners. 4 cities in our top 10 cities listening are in Australia. We have Adelaide, Melbourne, Canberra, and Brisbane. 3 states and 1 territory. So, I mean, it's pretty amazing the spread of listeners there in Australia. But I'm just wondering, we joke around about it, but, you bring in that sexiness, that voice. I mean, a lot of ladies like that. And I'm just wondering if you can maybe attribute that to the rise in listens there in Australia.
No.
Just flat out no.
Not at all, mate. I'm sure. Look, I don't think Australian women find the Australian accent appealing.
Oh, okay. So maybe it's Tex, because we know
maybe
Tex.
it's Tex, mate.
We got a lot of.
Mate, I think
So maybe the U.S. ladies and the other countries like to hear you, and then got a lot of ladies also Tex. We got a couple of Texas cities always in our top 10 as well. So it's just interesting that you two guys bringing in the listeners. Maybe you guys need to start a podcast, or maybe like a male review type of strip club tour, something like that. I don't know,
mate.
I can tell you when I was a kid and Crocodile Dundee was a big thing.
right?
I used to try Australian accents to pick up girls when I was 13, 14. At the skate
that's
rink
hilarious.
And you know what? It actually worked.
Wow. Wow. We're going to try that here in a little bit. Speaking of that. So,
yeah.
Right. If it's any sort of review, it would have to be a voiceover review. I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's anything too sexy left. But
no, I'm with you guys. I'm with you, man. I hear it. I just having some fun with it, of course.
I think Tex would be a bigger hit, than I would with the Australian ladies.
All right, very good, very good.
I'd love to come over there. That would be awesome. Now, Mick, when we did the Tillie Devine episode, we talked about how the public turned out in masses to Katie Lee's funeral, but not so much for Tillie's. What happened when Chow died? Were the crowds big, and did they pay respects to him, or how'd that go?
Sorry, not at all. There was about 5 or so people. So there's, again, like
wow.
there was a handful of people who turned up. And even though, look, my take on it, even though he was an enigma, he was more feared, than he was actually revered. Like Kate was. Kate was revered. Kate, did a lot to do with, local charities and helping out, returned servicemen and, building soup kitchens or the equivalent. Like, she really did a lot for the community, whereas as Chow was just a feared thug, mate. No one, as soon as he went inside, he wasn't getting visits. No one really cared too much about him. And once he got out and got old and passed away, there was about 5 people.
Wow. That's amazing.
He just disappeared into obscurity.
That's crazy. Yeah. Now, Mick, we've done a lot of these great Australian true crime cases, and I know there's so many great characters. I've been watching a few this weekend, and the Chris Flannery, the Rent-A-Kill, Mr. Rent-A-Kill, that's a good one. We talked about Skull Murphy, the cop that some people think was dirty. But what do you think? Maybe some good ones to cover that we haven't already mentioned.
I haven't gone back straight back. Have you done a guy called Christopher Wilder?
No.
No. Okay. Well, Christopher Wilder was an Australian serial killer. He was actually an Australian American. If you put it serial killer, he comes from a family where his dad was a US soldier.
Okay.
And caught up with his mother, got married, had children, etc. He started his killing spree in Australia, but because his father had American citizenship, when the heat got on him here, he's actually got an American passport and then jumped over to the States. And that was in and around like the late 70s to, through to the 80s. And he went on an absolute killing spree, through the States. Started in Florida. He was a very successful builder, but would travel around the place, targeting young girls, especially. A lot of the times it was young girls in pairs.
Wow.
And so he would certainly be one, from almost like a joint. He's had murders in Australia and then, gone back over to the States.
Interesting.
So he's one. I know that Chris in the past has mentioned the Lindy Chamberlain case, which is the dingo who ate the baby.
Right.
Who, that's an interesting, case in and of itself, because everyone knows the Lindy Chamberlain, matter. And that was extremely polarizing. When it happened, people were either absolutely she did it, or no, she didn't. And look, it came to pass that, no, she didn't. Dingoes, which are obviously our native wild dog, which is probably like your, I don't know, what do you coyotes?
Coyote, right?
Coyotes, yeah.
But they run in packs, dingoes, and like they bring down kangaroos, as a pack,
Right.
so they're going to, attack a baby, and there's a whole lot of examples since where dingoes have attacked and killed children.
Wow.
So that's certainly an interesting case because it's, absolutely polarizing at the time. So look, there's
what about that new one? That new one I've been hearing about with the lady that poisoned her family members with the mushrooms.
The lunch.
Yeah.
They all went. Look, that's still playing out. That right. looks like it's more of a mistake.
I don't know. She got rid of that food processor, and it just but it looks.
She's
bad.
ended up in. It does, but she's ended up in hospital herself. She ate the lunch as well. She went to hospital. She was unwell. So there doesn't seem, on face value, there seems to be enough to suggest at this point that it's potentially just an accident, terrible mistake.
Yeah.
We're in a situation in Australia at the moment where psychedelics are becoming somewhat of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's, those, I don't even know what they're called, those ceremonies where they have, starts with I, it's like a psychedelic experience where a lot of, psychiatrists and doctors and those sort of people go to, ayahuasca or something like that. So that's becoming a bit of a thing. Use of mushrooms in small micro doses is becoming, somewhat fashionable.
Interesting.
So I think what's taken place is she's just gone, I'll get some mushrooms and we'll cook them up and, see what happens, and has ended up buying the wrong, getting the wrong ones. She bought them from an Asian grocery store.
Yeah. That's what
so she didn't just go and pick them herself.
Right.
And unfortunately it's ended up, 4 people are dead.
Yeah. I watched the Body Language channel that I follow, talked about her interview and thought she was being deceptive. But it could also be just the incredible stress of the whole situation. So hard to say, but like you said, that one's still playing out. So we'll see on that, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, we pick our own wild mushrooms down here, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. But, yeah, that's how they do it here in Illinois. A lot of guys that go out mushroom hunting and that's scary though, to think that you can get those death cap mushrooms that are like she fed those people is deadly,
Yeah.
Well, absolutely, and look, same thing here. A lot of people go and pick their own, and I don't know, Pete, if you remember when we did the
Yeah, you were talking about your wife going to the Belangolo
Yes.
forest to go mushroom hunting, right?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
so it's a couple of hours north of Canberra, and she was going, on a mushroom picking expedition, and they said, "Oh, where are we going?" And they said the Belangolo State Forest, and she said, "No, count me out."
Yeah, I got this Malat tour that we set us up with to take.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Come and pick some mushrooms and truffles, fellas.
Now, Mick, now, Pete, I know you have something else, but I just wanted to say it was awesome, Mick, being on this interview with you, man. And Pete, thanks for the opportunity to do this.
Yeah.
Was there anything else about Chow you wanted to tell us, or anything else you have before Pete does his thing here?
Nothing more about Chow, except for the fact that, as I said, from our perspective, he's the start of, the gangster sort of era. He was the Al Capone to a degree,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't quite as smart as Al Capone. He didn't go into, different businesses and put his money aside and, try to help out the community. It was just all, self-gratification. So everything was made for him. But obviously, like always, thank you for, one, inviting me on and letting me be a part of it, but also, focusing on some Australian cases.
No, it's a lot of fun. Love having you on, and Tex as well. I mean, love both of you guys being involved with it. I thought this was super cool, though, to finally get you two to. We're on Zoom, so our listeners don't know, but you guys are able to actually see each other, and the listeners know you're by voice, but not what you look like. So I thought that was cool to be able to see each other. So.
And for the ladies, Tex is a hell of a lot better looking than I am.
Oh, no, I disagree with that.
Well, speaking of that, like you guys have mentioned, I got a little thing I wanted to do. And we know how both of you guys, are a draw for the listeners. I mean, just the episodes you both are on do very well. I thought it would be fun to do something our listeners can get, let us know what they think about this. We want to know which one of you guys sounds sexier, but I'd like to turn the tables around a little bit and have you say a line in the accent of the other. So, Tex, I would like to hear you say, "Hey, mate, pass the Vegemite. Let's go toss some shrimp on the Barbie." And then Mick, I'd like to hear you in a Texas accent say, "Howdy, partners. Let's grill some steaks and bust out the Budweisers." So I thought that would be fun. So Tex, you said that you tried a Australian accent on some girls in your youth, so maybe you may knock this out of the park. So why don't you give it a try?
I'll add a caveat. I'll add a caveat to that. We don't call them shrimp. We call them prawns.
Oh, okay.
So you got to say, let's toss some prawns on the Barbie.
Okay.
All right. And I have one thing I'd like to change for you.
Yeah.
Instead of Budweisers, we don't drink Budweiser down here. We drink a beer called Shiner Bock.
Shiner
Called
Bock.
what?
Shiner Bock. B-O-C-K.
Shiner
Bock.
Okay.
Shiner Bock.
Yep.
So is that a dark beer?
It's have you ever had Hefeweizen from Germany?
Yep. Yeah.
It's kind of like a Hefeweizen kind of thing. It's a wheat beer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really good.
All right, so Tex, you go, you give it a try first.
All right, here we go. Oi, mate, pass the Vegemite. Let's toss some prawns on the Barbie.
That was awesome.
that was pretty good.
That was pretty good, Mick.
It sounded English. It sounded like an Englishman doing an Australian accent, but that was still pretty good.
That was great.
I am an Englishman, so hey.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I don't think I can. I had a look at some Dr. Phil videos to see whether I could copy how Dr. Phil talks.
Okay, I was wondering if you watched like a John Wayne movie or something. Though.
Yeah, mate. I've got nothing, but we'll give it a go.
All right.
Howdy, partners. Let's grill some steaks and bust out a shiner box.
Oh shit, that was awesome.
That was great. That was great. I knew you guys I knew you guys would have fun with that. That's awesome. Because it was funny when I first did the questions. I hadn't sent them to you guys yet because I wanted to make sure I didn't have any other things pop in. And Mick sends me an email and says, "Hey, you should have us both do something to see who's got the sexier voice." And I thought, that's funny you say that. I had this idea, and then I thought to twist it around and have you imitate each other's accents. So that's awesome. That's awesome. So, Mick, always a pleasure, mate. Definitely do this again. I was jotting down all that stuff you were talking about with the different prisons. There's like 4 or 5 episodes worth of stuff there. So we will definitely do this again. And Tex, you're always welcome to be involved with it. I'm glad you were able to do this. And that you guys could actually finally meet each other. So very, very cool. So from all of us here at Murder Metal Mayhem, I want to say horns high and thank you both again for doing this. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks,
awesome.
Pete.
Thanks, Pete.
Mother, man.